Have you ever wondered why life sometimes feels like a repetitive cycle? As if you're stuck in a story that never seems to move forward? Perhaps you've been trapped in disappointment, fear, or the sense that there's something more, just out of reach. C.S. Lewis once asked a profound question: isn't it interesting that we have such a strong desire for something this world can't fully satisfy? What if that feeling of frustration is simply a reminder that your story isn't finished yet? What if God is waiting for the right moment to step in and write a new chapter? Imagine this: a life no longer held back by fear or insecurity, but a life where you're walking with God, fully empowered by His grace. Just as Lewis wrote, "There are far better things ahead than any we leave behind." God is ready to turn the page and rewrite your life with fresh purpose, joy, and hope. He doesn't merely watch us live, He actively reshapes and redeems the broken pieces, turning them into something far more beautiful than we can imagine. What if today was the day everything changed? What if you allowed God to take the pen and start writing your next chapter? Stick around as we dive into 7 life-changing biblical principles that will equip you to unlock this new season of your life. By the end of this journey, you'll be ready to say goodbye to the old story and welcome the new adventure that God has in store for you. Don't settle for anything less than God's best. Stay with us, and let's explore how God is about to transform your life, one principle at a time. Are you ready to embrace the incredible journey He has planned? No matter what you've been through, no matter how many times you think you've stumbled, take heart, your journey is far from over. God hasn't finished writing your story yet, and the chapters ahead are filled with His divine purpose and grace. C.S. Lewis reminds us, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. This truth is not merely comforting, it is deeply motivating because it reminds us that our struggles are not without purpose. The trials we face, though painful, are not the final word on our lives. They are, in fact, the very tools God uses to shape us into the people He created us to be. In the grand scheme of life, challenges and difficulties are inevitable. As Lewis insightfully observed, we are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us, we are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be. But the true question is, how will we respond to these hardships? Will we allow them to paralyze us in fear and defeat, or will we, with faith, rise up and trust that God is at work in ways we cannot yet see? The choice lies in our response. It is not the circumstances themselves that define us, but how we move forward despite them. God has a remarkable ability to turn what seems broken into something beautiful. The mess of our lives, the moments where we feel we failed, are not the end. They are opportunities for God to reveal His redemptive power. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, beautifully states, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what He is doing. But presently He starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is He up to? The explanation is that He is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. This image of God as the master architect of our lives helps us see that our pain and confusion have a higher purpose. He is creating something greater than we can imagine. However, for God to reshape and rewrite our stories, we must be willing to let go. Our human nature wants control, to hold tightly to our plans, but there's profound freedom in surrendering the pen to God. Just as Lewis said, there are far better things ahead than any we leave behind, so too must we trust that God's plans surpass our own. When we relinquish control, we open ourselves to a future that is not bound by our past failures, but instead anchored in God's promises. Remember, God is not only the author of your story, but He is also the finisher. What He begins in you, He will carry on to completion. Today, choose to trust Him. Surrender the script you've been clinging to, and allow Him to unfold the magnificent plans He has for your life. For in His hands, even the messiest stories become masterpieces. Throughout the Bible, we see numerous examples of individuals whose unwavering faith in God not only changed their own lives, but also shaped the course of history. Take the Apostle Paul, for instance. Once a fierce persecutor of Christians, Paul's encounter with Jesus transformed him into one of the most influential leaders of the early church. His letters still guide millions today. Imagine if Paul had given up because of his past, thinking he was too broken or unworthy to be used by God. Similarly, Moses, despite his initial reluctance and self-doubt, led the Israelites out of Egypt, trusting in God's promises even when the journey seemed insurmountable. David, a young shepherd boy, faced Goliath not with fear, but with faith, knowing that God was with him. What if David had let the giant intimidate him and turn him away from his calling? These stories remind us that perseverance and faith, even when the odds are against us, brings about extraordinary outcomes. It is often easy to think that the people God chooses to do great things are exceptional from the start, heroes born from special circumstances. Yet the truth is, God loves to use ordinary, imperfect people to achieve his extraordinary purposes. Just look at Moses, who had a speech impediment, or David, who was the least likely candidate in his family to be anointed king. God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. This is a lesson that should fill us with hope and encouragement. C.S. Lewis, in his work Mere Christianity, once wrote, "God does not want something from us. He simply wants us." This truth resonates deeply when we see how God takes broken, flawed vessels and uses them for his glory. His strength is made perfect in our weaknesses, and his plans are far greater than we could ever imagine. One of the greatest battles we face in life is not against external challenges, but against our own personal doubts. Fear, insecurity, and a sense of inadequacy often paralyze us from stepping into the life God has designed for us. We tell ourselves we are not capable, that others are more qualified, or that our past disqualifies us from any meaningful future. However, as the stories of Paul, Moses, and David teach us, our beginnings do not define our potential. The Bible consistently shows that fear and insecurity are hurdles to be overcome, not limitations to be accepted. Courage, dear heart. C.S. Lewis once wrote, reminding us that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. If we allow fear to control us, we will never see the fullness of what God has in store. God sees your potential, even when you don't. He knows the gifts and strengths he has placed within you, and he can bring those to light in ways you may not expect. The challenge is to trust in God's vision for your life, even when it feels unclear or overwhelming. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This verse offers a glimpse into God's heart for us. He sees beyond our current circumstances, our past mistakes, and our perceived limitations. God's plan is bigger than anything we could devise on our own. Like a master artist, he sees the masterpiece even while we're still just the canvas, and he carefully works out every detail to bring about his perfect vision. When we feel unqualified or insignificant, we must remember that God has already equipped us with everything we need to fulfill our purpose. Yet, knowing that God sees our potential isn't enough. We must be willing participants in his plan. Too often we resist change because it's uncomfortable. But stepping into our destiny requires us to let go of our own agendas and allow God to rewrite our story. It takes faith to surrender control and trust in his timing and direction. Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. When we lean on God, we stop relying on our own limited understanding and start walking in alignment with his divine will. This is where the miraculous happens. When we place our lives in God's hands, he can use us in ways far beyond what we could imagine. There's a certain beauty in allowing God to take control of our lives. While it may seem like we are giving up something, we are actually gaining everything. C.S. Lewis wisely observed there are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. When we let God direct our steps, we begin to see His hand at work in the most unexpected ways. We discover that our story, though filled with mistakes and imperfections, becomes a testimony of God's grace, love, and power. Our pain, our failures, and our fears are transformed into opportunities for God's glory to shine through. The willingness to trust God with our future comes from a place of gratitude for what He has already done. It is in remembering how He has carried us through past trials that we find the strength to face new challenges. Each of us, like Paul, Moses, and David, has a unique story, and God desires to use that story to impact others. As we look to the future, let us be filled with thankfulness that God is the author of our lives. He has guided us when we were lost, comforted us when we were broken, and empowered us when we felt weak. His faithfulness is the reason we can trust Him with all that is to come. May we have the courage to persevere in faith, the humility to allow God to use us in our imperfections, and the wisdom to overcome our doubts, knowing that He sees our potential. And above all, may we be grateful deeply and sincerely for the God who loves us, leads us, and never abandons us, even when we feel unqualified for the journey ahead. Through Him, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the impossible becomes possible. Letting go of the past is perhaps one of the greatest acts of faith we can embrace in our walk with God. The burden of past wounds, mistakes, and regrets can cling to us like a shadow, holding us back from the life that God intends for us to live. Yet, as Paul reminds us in Philippians 3, verse 13 to 14, we must forget what lies behind and strain forward to what lies ahead. This passage encourages us to release our grip on yesterday so we can fully embrace the new future God is crafting. Forgiving those who have hurt us and allowing God to heal the deep scars left by pain is not an easy process, but it is essential for spiritual growth. C.S. Lewis insightfully stated, "Getting over a painful experience is much like crossing monkey bars. You have to let go at some point in order to move forward." In that simple truth lies a profound invitation to surrender, an invitation to trust that God's plan is better than anything we could orchestrate ourselves. Facing fears and past failures is part of that surrender. It takes immense courage to stand in the face of your own shortcomings, to acknowledge the fear that you carry within, and to submit those fears to God. In the same way that David confronted Goliath, we are called to confront our own giants, the towering fears of inadequacy, rejection, and failure that stand in our way. David's faith was not in his own strength, but in the power of God. As he declared in 1 Samuel 17, verse 47, "It is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's." When we surrender our fears and failures to God, we are giving Him control over the battle. Though this surrender requires humility and bravery, it is a necessary step toward spiritual transformation. Transformation is at the heart of what God desires for us. When we yield our lives to His direction, God begins a divine process of renewal. He strips away the burdens that weigh us down, the lies we've believed, the insecurities we've harbored, the emotional baggage we carry. In Romans 12, verse 2, we are urged, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." The act of surrendering to God opens the door for this transformation. As we allow His truth to infiltrate our hearts, He breaks the chains of our past and replaces them with freedom, peace, and a new sense of purpose. Just as a caterpillar must undergo a season of metamorphosis to emerge as a butterfly, we too must trust in the process of spiritual renewal, believing that God will make us into something new and beautiful. And as God transforms us, He fills us with His love and truth. In 1 John 4, verse 16, we are reminded, "God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him." God's love is not just an abstract idea, it is a living, breathing reality that fills us, strengthens us, and empowers us to live in truth. His love eradicates fear, dispels doubt, and gives us the strength to move forward in faith. In the same way that a loving parent guides their child, God's love guides us with gentleness and firmness, reminding us of our true identity as His children. When we accept this love, we are not only transformed but equipped to share that love with others, becoming vessels of God's grace in a broken world. But love must lead to action. Faith, by its very nature, calls us to move forward, even when the road ahead is uncertain. Hebrews 11 verse 1 defines faith as the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Living by faith means stepping into the unknown, trusting that God will light the path before us. It's the faith of Abraham, who left everything familiar to journey to a land he had never seen. It's the faith of Peter, who stepped out of the boat and onto the water, despite the raging storm. Faith doesn't mean that we won't face challenges or that the journey will be easy. Rather, faith is the willingness to keep walking, even when we cannot see the full picture. As C.S. Lewis wisely put it, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods. God's presence is always with us in this journey. Even when we feel alone or unsure, He walks beside us, guiding us through every twist and turn. The promise of Matthew 28 verse 20 is clear, and surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. There is immense comfort in knowing that we are never truly alone. When we give our lives over to God and trust in His plan, He meets us exactly where we are, no matter how far we've wandered. Just as He walked with the Israelites through the wilderness, leading them by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, Exodus 13 verse 21 to 22, God walks with us through our wilderness seasons, providing direction, protection, and hope. Surrendering to God's will is not about losing control, but about gaining freedom. It's about trusting that the author of our lives is writing a story far greater than we could ever imagine. When we allow Him to take the pen, we open ourselves up to a future filled with purpose, love, and divine transformation. In every step of the journey, God is with us, guiding, loving, and transforming us. And for that, we can only respond with deep gratitude. As we face the unknowns, may we choose to let go of the past, embrace the love of God, walk by faith, and trust in His unfailing presence. God is faithful to complete the good work He has begun in us, and as we surrender to His will, we step into the fullness of the life He has always intended for us. Life is a canvas upon which God paints with grace and strength. When we think of the abundance of His blessings, it's impossible not to be in awe of how He weaves His divine strength into the very fabric of our existence. C.S. Lewis once said, "Relying on God has to begin all over again every day." As if nothing had yet been done, this quote reminds us that His strength and grace are not one-time gifts, but continual outpourings that sustain us. Every morning, God's mercies are new, and His power fills our hearts and souls, fortifying us for the journey ahead. His grace isn't just a comforting thought, it's the driving force that enables us to overcome obstacles, stand strong in trials, and find peace in moments of chaos. But as powerful as His grace is, the most important thing to remember is that your story isn't finished yet. No matter where you are in life, whether you're facing hardship, uncertainty, or even moments of triumph, God is not done with you. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 tells us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Your life is a story that God is still writing, and He has great plans that are far beyond anything you can imagine. Maybe you've experienced disappointment, setbacks, or detours that make it feel like the end. But in truth, these moments are merely chapters in a greater story filled with God's promises and your eventual breakthrough. Just as he led the Israelites through the wilderness, he will lead you through your challenges to a place of prosperity, peace, and joy. The best is yet to come, and God's hand is guiding you towards it. There is a necessary part you play in this divine story. While God's grace is given freely, it requires your partnership. His strength flows abundantly, but you must be willing to follow his lead. Proverbs 3 verse 5-6 offers timeless wisdom. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. There is great freedom in releasing control and allowing God to guide your steps. Too often we get caught in the belief that we know best, striving to manage every detail of our lives, only to be reminded that his ways are higher than ours. When we surrender our plans, ambitions, and fears and choose to cooperate with God's will, we allow him to lead us down paths of purpose and fulfillment. This cooperation requires faith, trust, and patience, knowing that even when things don't make sense to us, God is orchestrating everything for our good. When you give God control of your story, the result is something more beautiful than anything you could create on your own. In the Gospels, Jesus tells Peter, "Come, follow me," and with that simple invitation, Peter's life was transformed beyond anything he could have imagined. God has the same invitation for you today. He is calling you to let him write the narrative of your life. And when you do, your story will be one that reflects his glory, grace, and goodness. It won't be without difficulty or trial. Jesus never promised that life would be easy, but it will be filled with meaning, purpose, and a beauty that only comes from the hand of the Creator. As C.S. Lewis beautifully put it, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he is doing. But presently he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. This is the essence of surrendering to God's plan, trusting that even when it feels uncomfortable, he is making something far greater than we could ever dream up on our own. The beauty of God's story for your life is that it is one of redemption, transformation, and hope. He doesn't just fix what's broken, he makes all things new. The trials and tribulations you face are not wasted, but are used by God to shape your character, deepen your faith, and prepare you for the blessings that lie ahead. As you cooperate with him, your life becomes a reflection of his grace, a testimony to others of what God can do when we place our trust in him. What does this mean for you today? It means embracing the truth that God's grace is enough, his strength is sufficient, and your story is still unfolding. It means letting go of the need to control every outcome and trusting that God is writing something beautiful in your life, even when you can't yet see it. It means partnering with him, choosing to follow his lead, and believing that the best is yet to come. In this journey, always remember to be grateful. Gratitude is the lens through which we see God's faithfulness in our lives. Take a moment to reflect on how far he has brought you, the battles he has fought for you, and the grace he has poured out over you. Every step of the way, God has been with you, guiding, protecting, and providing. His faithfulness never fails, and his love for you is unwavering. As you continue to walk with him, may your heart be filled with gratitude for the story he is writing in your life, one of grace, strength, and beauty beyond measure. Trust in him, for he is the author and finisher of your faith, and he is writing a story far greater than you could ever imagine. In the depths of our challenges, we often find ourselves wondering where we can turn, feeling alone and overwhelmed by the weight of our circumstances. Yet, one truth remains constant throughout history: God is always present, walking alongside us in every season of life. Whether we are in the valleys of despair or on the mountaintops of triumph, he never leaves us nor forsakes us. As the psalmist David beautifully declares, Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23, verse 4. God's presence is not a fleeting moment or a distant concept, it is an ever-present reality that holds us in our most vulnerable times. C.S. Lewis once said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. This profound statement reflects the very heart of God's nature. He does not abandon us in hardship, but uses it as an opportunity to draw us closer to him. When we recognize his nearness, we can be comforted, knowing that our pain has purpose and our journey is not aimless. In every trial, God is crafting a testimony, a new chapter in our lives that will reveal his glory. The strength of God has the power to completely rewrite our stories, transforming our lives in ways we could never imagine. As Romans 8, verse 28 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. No obstacle is too great for him to overcome, and no past is too broken for him to redeem. But for this transformation to take root, we must take a step of faith. Faith, after all, is the currency of God's kingdom. It is the beginning of every divine intervention, and without it, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11, verse 6. Faith is not passive, it requires us to move, to trust in God's promises, even when we cannot see the way forward. The story of Peter walking on water is a vivid illustration of this truth. Peter was able to do the impossible, walk on the waves, only because he dared to step out of the boat and fix his eyes on Jesus. Likewise, when we act in faith, no matter how small or uncertain that first step may seem, we position ourselves to witness God's miraculous power at work. The Bible is filled with examples of God's supernatural intervention when people act in faith. Jesus himself said, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Matthew 17, verse 20. Mountains represent the insurmountable challenges we face in life, our fears, our failures, our limitations, but with even the smallest faith, these mountains can be moved by the hand of God. There is no limit to what he can accomplish when we trust him and take bold steps of faith. Whether it is overcoming an addiction, mending a broken relationship, or pursuing a seemingly unreachable dream, God is in the business of doing the impossible. To experience this transformation, we must not only act in faith but also align our lives with the timeless principles found in Scripture. The Bible offers us a roadmap for living a life that reflects God's will and experiences his blessings. There are countless biblical principles, but 7 stand out as particularly life-changing: faith, obedience, humility, love, perseverance, forgiveness, and gratitude. Each of these principles, when applied, has the power to revolutionize our lives and set us on a path toward a new beginning. Faith, as we have discussed, is the foundation. Obedience is the next step, for it is through obedience to God's word that we position ourselves to receive his blessings. Jesus said, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it," Luke 11, verse 28. Humility keeps us in the posture of dependence on God, recognizing that we cannot do anything in our strength, but must rely entirely on his grace. Love, the greatest commandment, compels us to put others before ourselves, to reflect God's love in all we do. Perseverance strengthens our resolve to keep pressing forward, even when the road is hard. As James 1 verse 12 promises, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." Forgiveness frees us from the chains of bitterness and resentment, allowing us to walk in the freedom that Christ purchased for us. Finally, gratitude transforms our perspective, enabling us to see God's hand in every circumstance and to trust that he is working all things for our good. Now, this message is not just about understanding these principles, but also about acting upon them. As James 1 verse 22 says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." We are called to be doers of the word, to put into practice the truths we have learned. When we begin to live out these biblical principles, we will start to see the transformation that God promises. It may not happen overnight, but it will happen. Slowly but surely, as we walk in faith and obedience, our lives will reflect the goodness and glory of God. When God extends His invitation, He offers more than a mere change in circumstances. He opens the door to a transformative journey toward fulfillment in His divine plan. The beauty of God's call is that He invites each of us to step into the unknown with the promise that He is there, ready to shape our lives according to His perfect will. C.S. Lewis once said, "There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind," reminding us that God's intervention leads to a future filled with hope, not dictated by our past. Responding to this invitation requires a leap of faith. The decision to trust God is a crucial moment where we surrender our doubts and believe that He is who He says He is: the Almighty, the Redeemer, the one who moves mountains. Proverbs 3 verse 5 urges us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Faith is not merely passive belief, but an active choice to walk in alignment with God, even when the path seems uncertain. God's strength is ever present, and His power is unmatched. He can renew all things, turning our trials into testimonies. Psalm 46 verse 1 declares, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." Through faith and action, we witness His miraculous transformations in our lives. As we walk in faith and apply His principles, we are changed. Our hearts, minds, and circumstances are renewed by His grace. In gratitude, we acknowledge that it is God's faithful guidance, strength, and wisdom that sustain us through every season. His unwavering presence is our greatest gift, and in Him we find the peace and purpose our souls seek.